Okay, without further ado, I'm going to launch into our didactic today, which is on the topic of ending a course of CBT for psychosis. And by my records, I haven't delivered this didactic since 2017, so I might be a little bit rusty on this. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them into the chat box or save them to the end because I can't see you guys right now. I'm going to be using the word termination. I know that people kind of bristle sometimes at that word. Feel free to insert terms like transition or graduation if those sit better for you. But we're really talking about the process of ending CBTP and how do we do that in a skillful way. And I think in terms of a rationale for why we are talking about this, in addition to the fact that CBT for psychosis or any course of CBT is a time-limited intervention, it's also in the spirit of providing recovery-oriented care, because a true commitment to recovery requires fostering independence of the individual with the help of their support system. Our goal is to teach the client to become their own coach or therapist, not to solve all of their problems. And so we'll be talking a lot about how do we know about when somebody's ready to end treatment, because there are endless kind of issues that will arise in the course of somebody's life that directly or indirectly pertain to psychosis. The CBT model, using the techniques that we'll discuss today, helps prepare clients for the transition out of therapy, and it also guides people about the potential for relapse and how we navigate that. I want to say a word about planned versus unplanned discharge. In an ideal world, all of our terminations would be carefully planned. We would have, we'd be orienting them continuously throughout the treatment. We'd have a target date or target, goals that we're working toward and then attain. But in the real world, we know that unplanned discharge can happen, right? Either because of client factors, they stop coming in, they move suddenly, their benefits change, or because of factors related to us. Maybe we're shifting services or agencies, or we have an unplanned illness. So we do want to acknowledge that we are, even if we're not working with multidisciplinary treatment teams, which I know for a fact many of you are, but even if you're not, that we provide CBTP within a context of care. And that context of care includes a lot of different mental health professionals and support staff. And so we want to acknowledge the role that they have in facilitating a healthy and helpful transition. I'm going to direct you to the small font at the bottom of this slide. We will be following up after this clinic with this article called "When Are Clients Ready to Terminate?" It was featured in Cognitive and Behavioral Practice more than 10 years ago, but it's highly relevant to our work, and a lot of the content of this didactic comes from this article. So then one of the number one questions we get around termination is, how do you know when you're done? And oftentimes we field these questions on echo, right? The client is still struggling with depression or anxiety, or these sets of psychotic symptoms are under good control, but this psychotic symptom is still there, psychosocial stressors. And so I really want to, kind of orient you guys or remind you that the answer to this question is really dictated by what you two, as a dyad, agreed to target in the beginning of the treatment. So really selecting appropriate treatment targets is a critical skill in delivering CBT. And I'm going to orient you. I did a little bit of revision to the agenda for today, which I forgot to mention at the beginning of our call. But one of the changes I made to the agenda was a section called Resource Roundup. And in this Resource Roundup, I linked to a practice brief that talks about SMART goals and how you set and stick to SMART goals. And so that's really a critical component to doing effective CBT and effective termination. So doing that problem goal list and then taking the goals that they identified and turning them into SMART goals is really critical, right? So for example, the client identifies the problem as the voices have power over me, and so you agree that they're going to work on having more of a feeling of control over their voices, but that's not yet a SMART goal. So the SMART goal is a lower score on the omnipotence scale of the BAVQ, which, you know, I guarantee you phrasing it that way is not going to be highly motivating or get them out of bed in the morning, but that's what you're putting into your treatment plan. And that's what you're tracking over the course of the treatment. And then you phrase the goal with the client in the way that's really kind of speaks to them. The other thing that we want to be thinking about is not just that the symptom itself is decreasing in frequency or intensity, but that the skill use is increasing, and especially unprompted, uncued, independent use of skills. And that's something that we really use as kind of the conduit to the individual's goal. And then, of course, we want to look for symptom stability, and there's no kind of defined time period. But, you know, we want to see that the person is able to maintain for some amount of time symptom stability, and that, again, that they're using those skills to manage symptoms when they do crop up. Okay, so in session 1, that's where termination starts. And that's why I front load this didactic early on in our kind of cycle of echo sessions, because session 1, we want to be orienting clients to the fact that this intervention is a time-limited program. We want to ask them, what are your hopes for your recovery? What does your recovery look like, or what does wellness look like to you? And in that, you know, additional Socratic questions like, how long do you expect that will take, or how long has that taken you? Kind of help me flesh this out, what this looks like to you. And this is so important because this becomes an anchor point. I had a client that I talked about on the last New Journeys Echo Clinic that you know, he's talked about the rich life. What I want is the rich life. And so we really spent a lot of time in the first few sessions defining, what does that mean? What does that look like? Who's a part of that life? What would it take to get to that life? And then I referred back to that so frequently over the course of our work together to really get him motivated to work for that. In that first session, our primary objective is instilling hope and confidence in their ability to learn and master the skills needed to meet their recovery goals, and in your ability as the clinician to teach them these skills and strategies that will help provide relief and reduce the impairment that they've been experiencing. So you guys, you're really setting yourself up as a team. You're going to be working together, and over time, the client's going to take on more and more responsibility and more of the the work in the session, and certainly between sessions. In the early stages of the treatment, beyond session 1, as much as possible, you want to clearly differentiate between recovery goals, which are long-term, and treatment targets, which are attainable in a finite number of sessions, and then steps toward those goals, which are attainable each week. So when you're setting up that home practice at the end of each session collaboratively, think to yourself or say it out loud, okay, what are we working towards here? What did we do in this session that will help you get closer to that goal? And what can you do now in between now and next week to make a little bit more steady progress, right? And make sure that you're really making that connection very, very clear. If the treatment targets shift, and that does happen sometimes, that's okay. You want to make a note of that, in the treatment plan, and then you're going to go through that same process of clearly defining the steps. And then who else do we need to get on board? Do we need to get the voc specialist on board? Do we need to get your boyfriend on board? And make sure that that you're kind of going through those steps. Throughout the treatment course, you're constantly looking for opportunities to attribute any progress that the client is making to his or her own hard work practicing these skills. Remember that we are shaping behavior, and so we need to use a lot of appropriate reinforcement when we're shaping behavior. And when I say appropriate reinforcement, I'm just reminding you that what is reinforcing to one person is not universally reinforcing. So, you know, this comes up often when we have clients with a psychotic disorder and then maybe comorbid cluster B. Sometime, or maybe there's something else, you know, in the clinical picture that in your formulation leads you to believe that when you praise progress, the person actually regresses. They actually do worse, okay? And so you want to be thinking about, maybe that's not a great tactic for this individual to be, you know, commending them on how much progress they're making, because that actually could kind of tip the boat in the bad direction. So think about that formulation, think about what is reinforcing to this person, and then make sure that you're shaping their behavior of using skills independently. The data dashboard can be really helpful to visualize progress. And if they're not progressing in the expected direction, then it doesn't mean that you don't go over their scores on the measures with them. What it means is that you look at it and say, that's okay, we expected that this could happen. Let's figure out what we need to do to get you back on track, or to get you on track, right? And then we want to be thinking about what changes in thinking and or behavior that led to the reduction in distress when we do see that happen, and then call these out, right? So it's not enough just to say, hey, great, the voices weren't as intense this week. It's let's figure out what you did differently to help make that experience happen, right? Okay, so another technique that you'll use throughout the treatment course is leveraging other team members to emphasize how skills learned in CBTP apply to different types of problem, right? This is skill generalization. So you might have taught them a specific technique to use with the voices, but they might also find that it's helpful just to self-soothe when they feel distress or to increase energy. And so how can the Vogue specialist or the family therapist or whomever else on your team, case manager, how can they call those out so that the person is remembering to use those beyond just when they hear voices? Make sure that you're kind of fostering independent skill use through your home practice. And then anything that wasn't explicit or intentional, but you heard them say that they used a skill, make sure you're calling that out and really reinforcing that. And then make sure that the client has their notebook or a way to organize the tools that they've used throughout the treatment, the things that they have learned that are effective to them, whether that's on making sense or something else, that they really need to be able to access these after the treatment ends. So for example, given that the peer group turned out to be, the person, let's say, went to a peer group for their home practice and they thought it was going to be, you know, really uncomfortable for them, but it was fine. It was just fine. So given that the peer group turned out to be better than you expected, what might you do next time you have negative expectations about going to a social event, right? And that's really important because it's not just about them going to that peer group. These are the kinds of negative expectations often come up with people who've been socially isolating. Okay, goal setting and maintenance stages. So this is our active intervention phase and also our relapse prevention phase. We want to make sure that we're doing a lot of cheerleading, but also at the same time that we're preparing clients for setbacks. As oftentimes as clients begin to feel better, they start to become more fearful or hopeless or discouraged that they won't be able to maintain these gains. They might have thoughts like, I'll never get better, or, I'm going to have another relapse. And so we really want to try to draw those cognitions out, or if we know about them in advance because we've done it came up when we were doing our psychosocial assessment in phase 1 of the treatment, then we really want to make sure that we are addressing those and doing some cognitive restructuring on those kinds of thoughts. So an example of preparing a client for setbacks. So the team member, in this case the therapist, says, you've been making good progress, the voices have started to fade into the background more, your speech is clearer, and you're getting out of the house and showering more. Client says, I'm feeling better. Clearly this is a client with a lot of negative symptoms and some disorganization. Team member says it's common to experience setbacks along the way, like feeling more depressed or the voice is increasing. Let's discuss how you would handle it. So imagine that you've had a week where it seems that nothing has gone well. Can you get a picture of that in your mind? Describe it to me. And then what kinds of thoughts are you having about that? Client responds and team member says, now I want you to remind yourself that setbacks are a normal part of the process and temporary. And they might even now write that down in their own words. In addition to reminding yourself of this, let's strategize some other things you could do to help you through that tough week, right? So tough weeks happen to all of us. How are you going to get through your tough week, and really making sure you're planning ahead? And in relapse prevention, this is really where we're trying to maximize skill generalization. So can you do a pro-con matrix of the advantages and disadvantages of tapering sessions? That can really elicit some cognitions that are going to be important to target. Like the person thinks, well, if we start tapering our sessions, then I'm going to start doing worse, or I'm going to relapse, or everything's going to go to pot. Like, make sure that you're kind of using this as a tool to elicit some of their concerns so that you can actually respond to them. You want to make sure that you're reviewing what was learned and empowering the clients to both use what they learned, but also to teach what was learned to others. And this could be informally to their loved ones, or it could be more formally. If you're a stepped care agency and you think it's indicated, you could step them down into group, and they could have do a huge service to the other group members, or maybe it's as in a peer role. Just as we prepare the client for end of therapy, we want to make sure that we're preparing the clinical and natural supports as well. So tends to be heavier involvement in this last phase of treatment. And we're going to hear more about that next week. So I won't go in 2 weeks. So I won't go into too much detail on that.